Hello everyone, my name is Selena Mosley, and on behalf of the organisers Oliver Kinross, I would like to welcome you all to London Build Online. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors, but with very special mention of FlowForma, our sponsor of today's session. So today's session is a panel discussion on finding new digital fixes to day-to-day construction processes, moderated by Ursula Cullen and joined by our panelists Andrew and Paul. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A throughout the session, so do take the opportunity to submit your questions in the questions box in the control panel on your screen. So I hope you all enjoy the next 90 minutes, and I would like to hand over to you now, Ursula.
Hi everyone, thank you very much Selena for the nice introduction, and welcome everyone today to our webinar. So I am delighted to be joined by FlowForma product strategist Paul Stone. With 27 years experience in the IT industry, Paul is a highly accomplished IT professional who is the go-to product expert from both a business and technical perspective. Paul works closely with FlowForma clients, supporting them in the delivery of FlowForma process automation, helping organizations automate and streamline their business processes. I would also like to introduce Andrew Gamblin. Andrew is a digital manager for Wilmot Dixon Construction, North London and East offices. In this role, he looks after effective implementation of the latest technologies, processes and BIM throughout the office. His background is in structural engineering, and the majority of his experience in construction was gained in the heavy refurbishment of existing assets in central London whilst working for a steel fabricator. Project management, logistics and workshop management for these types of projects showed him the power of collaborative work environment and how visualizing in 3D can help communicate and complicate schemes. Norman Owan, Digital Construction Lead at Balfour Beatty, was due to be our third panellist today, but unfortunately will not be able to join us due to unforeseen circumstances. We are very sorry for this last-minute change, as Balfour is a FlowForma customer, and we were really looking forward to hearing Norman's views on the digital fixes for day-to-day construction processes. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted, but you can use the chat functionality, as Selena just mentioned, to ask any questions, which we will share with the panel at the end. And without further ado, I think we'll get straight into the panel discussion. So, topic one, first we would like to discuss the current digital climate of construction. The world has changed dramatically in recent months, and now more than ever, digital processes that enable construction workers to focus on the job at hand are essential to business process automation. Andrew, to kick off, maybe you could share some challenges you've experienced in Wilmot Dixon since COVID hit.
Well, I think one of the main challenges is probably quite evident in my background as it currently stands. Obviously, I'm working from home, as is the vast majority of other people around the globe. And it's one of these things that once the pandemic hit, sort of March, April time last year, we had to find a way very quickly to make sure that people were still productive and still able to work without being able to be located exactly where they were previously. So where we used to have loads of meetings in person, we had to find ways of trying to communicate and collaborate, talk to each other and undertake work that traditionally we would have done face to face. Even more so, obviously, from a site operatives point of view, ensuring that we're safe in terms of COVID. So making sure that we're working in a socially distanced manner, that we're working in a safe environment was key. So there's been a huge number of changes, I think, within our organization, majority of which being centered around digital and centered around being able to work in a more digital fashion. So making use of collaborative technologies and systems that allow people to communicate in a digital sense without having to be face to face with people. That is probably the biggest change that's come through since the pandemic has hit.
Yeah, I think I'd certainly concur with that, Andrew. Certainly we've noticed increased interest in digitalization across the board from all industries, especially in construction. But I think with construction, it's interesting because there was already a kind of a pressure, if you like, to digitize within construction, or certainly we felt that prior to COVID. And then COVID came along and just accelerated everything, and everybody's now frantic, if you like, to digitize as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So it's certainly had a big effect in terms of pushing up digitization on the agenda on the board to make it happen as soon as possible. And yeah, we've really noticed that happening over the past 12 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you.
And now that construction sites are opening again, is there more pressure in the industry now, do you think, to digitize? I don't know, Andrew, what your thoughts are there.
Yes, kind of like Paul sort of intimated there, and when he was saying there's been a growing pressure, I think, since probably around April 2016, just as in terms of a digitization initiative within construction, with the mandate for, at the time, BIM Level 2 on government projects across the UK. And there was always a slow rumbling in the background of people starting to digitize and starting to get to grips with what they could do in a digital sense, how BIM could help them with not only the design phase of a construction project, but the construction phase, the operational phase, all of these different aspects, and understanding how BIM can be utilized as a foundation basically for more digitized processes within their organization. And then obviously with COVID hitting and forcing people to be in a position where frankly you have to interact and deal with digital systems and digital software, that just fully accelerated things even further. So, you know, investigating more in terms of technologies along the lines of 360 cameras, being able to see a site without being on a site, to have an individual person walking around live streaming what it is that they're seeing, discussing about different issues that are occurring on site, even off site during design phase. How can you know, collaborate more efficiently? How can you get that same outcome of being in the room with 10 or 15 other people without being in a room physically with 10 or 15 other people? And I think now that people have realized that it's achievable and that there are benefits to it, now that things are opening up further, people are realizing digital is 100% the way that we need to go. And we can see that there are huge benefits that we're only scratching the surface of as an industry compared to other sectors within the economy.
Absolutely, I would agree there. And like I remember only like 3 years ago, people talking to me about BIM and saying, "Oh, you know, it's just a marketing thing. It's not really." They weren't really taking it too seriously. But all of a sudden, it's really again become so much more important. But what's really changed, and you kind of pointed that out there, Andrew, over the past few years, is what technology is available in the marketplace. Suddenly, these great new technologies coming on that allow people to actually achieve things that they never could do before. We kind of said it already, but that's been accelerated to the whole pandemic experience. But they were already in progress. So like the 360-degree cameras and so on, that technology was already starting to become prevalent. And now people are far more interested in it than they were ever were before. And the technology itself is far better than it was back then too. So now seems to be the right time. And I think a lot of people in the marketplace are sensing this, the right time to digitize in construction.
Yeah, for sure.
Brilliant. And Paul, I know you kind of touched on it there. So, you know, how have we got to where we are today? And I suppose you just mentioned that the need is there, but, you know, where are these new platforms coming from, and how are organizations now deciding that it is time?
Well, that's right. It's taken some time for these technologies to become ready for the marketplace. So while there was talk about this, you know, 3-4 years ago, the technologies were still pretty primitive. And I think that's because construction was a little bit neglected. You know, not a whole lot of investment was put into IT in general in construction projects. And as a result of that, not a lot of interest was coming from the suppliers to further develop the systems. But that's certainly something that's changed in the past few years. And the sophistication now of the systems that are available to construction companies is really significantly better than it was in the past. And because of that, it's driving an awful lot of value. So, you know, that those improvements in technology are able to add value to the construction projects and construction activities. So, you know, it's ultimately driving productivity in the construction companies, and productivity equals cash at the end of the day. It also equals reduced risk and so on. We'll talk more about that, I know, later on. But it's this change, this improvement in the level of technology that's available to construction companies and construction projects that has really improved over the past few years and that in turn is driving adoption of these technologies in the marketplace.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's definitely elements as well where I think people have realized the value of the data and what it is that can be done with data. And because of that, that's again forcing people to investigate the different software that exists out there, and where there isn't something that meets their specific needs to gather, record, visualize the data, they're starting to invest in these technologies and these new systems to make sure that they can get what they need to really drive the insights moving forwards.
Absolutely
Brilliant.
agree with that.
Great. And then that might move us nicely on to topic 2 then. So for topic 2, we'd like to discuss the process challenges in construction. So quite a topical discussion, I think, guys. So to kick off, Paul, there seems to be a new direction for construction organizations, a revamp of initiatives, you might say, and business people are now leading those initiatives. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that's a little different when you compare the construction industry to others is the investment in IT in the construction industry has always been at quite a low level, we feel. This is based on our own interactions with construction and other industries. So what's changed now is that people are realizing that they need to invest, and they need to invest to become more productive. And one of the ways they can do that is focusing in on processes, digitizing processes. We'll talk more about what that means a little bit later, I guess, but they've seen that that's a way forward. The problem is with such a low level of investment previously in IT, they don't have access to the IT resources to make that digital transformation happen. So they're quite limited in terms of what they can do with their own resources. Now, of course, there are external companies that can help them with that, but one thing that people we feel are realizing is that there are systems out there, and there's one called the FlowForma, which can help you digitize by using your business resources. What does that mean? Get the engineers to do the job, get the apprentices to do the job, get them to actually digitize those processes so you can actually build little applications to make your company ultimately more productive. And the thing about it is that while you might be very constrained in the level of IT resource that you have access to, you do have engineers, you do have apprentices, and what we can show you is that they can be trained to actually produce systems themselves. We'll do a little demonstration of one later on, but that's a key thing. So where you're restricted in terms of your IT resources, you can actually use your business resources to help you digitize your processes.
And
Great.
sorry, I was going to say I'd agree with what Paul was saying there, and just to add to that, there's some other elements to it, like construction is very much a traditional industry, traditional sector. It still ultimately ends up with someone standing in a hole on site building something. That's predominantly where it ends up. And so most people, because it's one of those scenarios of if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's a scenario, and we'll touch on this next in terms of the paperwork side of things. People have relied on paper because it is just an easier way of doing things. It's quicker. Actually, no, it's not quicker and it's not easier. Let me rephrase that. It's more along the lines of people are more used to using that methodology of working, which means that for them, if they're under pressure, which unfortunately construction typically is just always under pressure, whether it be commercial pressures or time pressures or quality pressures, whatever it's going to be, they're going to go to what they know, and everyone knows paperwork. But because of COVID, because of things like the Grenfell incident, because of new legislation that's coming in, like for example the Building Safety Bill, the UK BIM framework, all these different digital initiatives, people are realizing all of a sudden, oh, paperwork, we can get so far with it. And people are now starting to understand the value that the IT brings, and IT is not just Outlook plus Word. It's actually a lot more behind that, because they've had to learn it through the COVID scenario of working remotely. And how do you capture the data? How do you do this? How do you do that? Which now means that people who traditionally were fine leaving it being as it was have now realized, actually, let's digitize this. Let's look at our processes. Let's get involved with this stuff to start making it better. And let's not make this the remit of a single specialist within the company. Let's democratize it to an extent.
Absolutely.
Digital stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Andrew, that's absolutely it. The pandemic has forced the hand of people. It's forced them to try new things. And it's just at the right time in terms of technology development in the marketplace here that the technologies are actually available for them to try. Like if you think back, if this pandemic happened a couple of years ago, there would be no Teams, there would be no this, there would be no that. But now, right now, the technologies have evolved to such a state that they're actually ready to be adopted. And you know, the pandemic has kind of forced people's hands and forced them to try something new that out of their comfort zone. And you know, I'm pleased to say that, you know, a lot of people have found that that was the right thing to do, you know, to make that jump.
And kind of like coming on to the next point you got there, Ursula, in terms of the decision makers facing broken processes and reliance on paper. I think I heard a statistic somewhere in a presentation that said something around 50% of all processes within construction are waste. They provide no value to anyone, basically. They are paperwork or processes for processes' sake, which is an interesting scenario to be in. And when you look at traditionally, or at least my experience of why people are so heavily reliant on paper, it's because of that legal side of things, the commercial side of things, the necessity to have some kind of a signature, someone signing something at the end. And whilst the world is changing, and I know legal circles, they're starting to adopt more things like digital signing capabilities that kind of, you know, they act the same way as they would do on a normal piece of paper. They're still a little bit in their infancy. And so people are kind of like, how do we do this? Can we get rid of processes? And, you know, in some instances, I've definitely come across processes that they should not even be digitized. They should just be removed entirely. They should be something that, you know, the processes need to be revamped holistically. And I think that's something that is a golden opportunity for people.
Absolutely. This is the time to look at those processes, and because you're absolutely right. They've been pieces of paper that people have been filling in for the sake of it. And it's a funny thing with pieces of paper and paper forms. It's actually very difficult to change those processes. It's difficult to actually think about the processes, change the processes, and be confident of doing it. But if you digitize them, the whole thing becomes more fluid. You can actually change and evolve them. And you know what? You might evolve them out of existence completely because they're unnecessary. And you know what, Andrew, it's really interesting what you're saying there about signing a piece of paper. Because when we had our product to market, before we introduced it into construction, we didn't have a thing called a signature field. And we only introduced it because people in construction said, oh, no, but we have to be able to physically sign a piece of thing on a screen. And we said, but why? Why? You got a full digital record of your activities. You don't need to physically sign anything. But they said, no, we have to sign it. We have to sign it. So we introduced the signature field on the thing. But that was totally because, you know, people in construction said, no, that's too much of a change. We got to be able to physically sign something. And it is living in the past, really, in our minds. But hey, if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do.
It's a traditional industry, you know. That's
yeah,
been doing the same thing for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. You know, there's no real difference.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think everything there definitely backs up the point of 69% of construction decision makers facing broken processes and too much reliance on paper. And maybe that's why the processes are broken. They've been sitting there for too long, you know, on a piece of paper, and no one has reviewed them. And now it's kind of letting people think outside the box as well, and you know, simplify those processes and make them, you know, a bit more informative or easier for everyone involved. So great stuff there, guys. Thanks a mil. The last point there then is around external stakeholders. So the likes of contractors, partners, suppliers, architects and clients. All these individuals now are looking to participate in processes, you know, and trying to participate actively in business processes. But what challenges have we seen around this, Andrew? Have you seen any yourself?
Yeah, I've seen quite a few actually in terms of processes or dealing with people who are outside of your organization themselves and trying to bring them inside to what it is that you're doing. Construction is such a fragmented and fractured industry with so many different specialists in so many different areas that everyone has their own niche, if you want to call it that, in the market. But you've also got some people that you deal with that have no niche and have no knowledge. You know, there's a lot of external stakeholders that you deal with in construction that literally don't understand what's going on. You know, a lot of the end users and the customers that we deal with, and it's no fault of theirs, they just don't understand construction. They don't understand how to read a 2D drawing. They don't understand how to you know, why a particular piece of paper needs to be signed, or you know, why a certain schedule or spreadsheet needs to be reviewed and signed off. And it's either they don't understand it because it's confusing to them, or the method in which the information is being presented to them is confusing. And so when we look at trying to bring in others from outside the organization into how it is that we're working in the processes that are going on there, there's kind of, I guess to an extent, sort of three questions that we kind of ask ourselves with these processes, which is who, why, and what is kind of the three things, and we'll probably come on this a little bit later. But effectively, the idea is trying to make sure that those who are engaging with the process understand their role, their part, and what it is that they need to do within it to then enable us to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And a lot of it simply just comes down to communication. It comes down to people understanding what it is that they need to do and how they need to interact with things. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we'd see that too in construction, where I think more so than any other industry we work with, you know, you have contractors, external contractors of lots of different kinds. As you say, Andrew, it's not just construction workers, it's legal teams and so on. People who don't necessarily know your processes and the way you work, and the way in some cases the way construction works. So yeah, absolutely, you need to have some way of involving those, and communication, of course, is key. Um, what we do here is we have a facility in the system that actually allows you to externalize your workflow. So when you progress to a certain step in the workflow, you can say that that's actually assigned to an external person, and involve them in it. So they fill in a form basically, and upload a document, whatever, as part of a process. But you know, that's just one thing, one part of the puzzle, one piece in the puzzle, excuse me. But yeah, involving external stakeholders, I think in construction more than any other sector, is so critical. With such a large proportion of the workforce being contractors, subcontractors, contractors, and so on, it's a really critical thing. And I would totally take your point there on communication. Good communications really help keep the wheels moving. So.
Yeah, and Andrew, I'm sure since COVID as well, now it's not contractors coming on site or external people being able to chat to you in person. Now it's you're in your office or you're at home and they're in their home. So it's another, I suppose, ballard in the mix there as well. I'm sure that causes difficulties too.
It certainly can. Generally, it's the difficulties are caused by family members that are running through the background, or alternatively pets, or something on those lines. Unforeseen, but frankly quite welcome sometimes, distractions that happen in the middle of a meeting. It's always quite nice when you see someone's cat or dog just suddenly jump up into frame, and you know, conversation takes a slight different turn briefly. It's quite nice.
Okay, great. So let's move on then to our third topic today, which is overcoming process challenges with digital tools. So I suppose we just chatted about the challenges there, but you know, how can someone overcome these challenges, or how can an organization kick off? So we'll get started then, just around that exactly of how to get started. So Paul, maybe you could suggest to people when they're looking to address these challenges, how they can actually do that.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a process view on things here, which you know, what I would say to you is that process is a good place to start. So if you're doing any digital transformation program, process is a good place to start. Why? Because processes lead you to achieving business goals. So what we would say is that focus in on process, because processes get results that are measurable, and those measurable results can drive further investment. So if you digitize business processes, whatever they may be, a field change request, whatever it is, once you digitize those processes, you can measure the performance of that process. And by measuring improvements in the performance of the process, you can then go on to justify further investment. So that's what we'd say, focus in on processes. And we obviously have a viewpoint on that. We are a process company. Focus in on processes. And then basically you can measure your returns, drive further investment. And what I'd say as well is that in terms of any digital tool, you've also got to focus on adoption. And it's something that we talked about earlier on, Andrew, like it's difficult sometimes to get people to change, to get people to adopt systems. So it's a key thing we'd always say is that focus on adoption. Find if you're going to work on processes, find a process that everyone knows. We call them kind of captain obvious processes, the obvious ones that are clearly not working very well. Put in a digital fix for that. And then get people involved and get people adopting the digital tool, the digital solution. Because at the end of the day, any digital tool is only good if it's adopted by the workforce and used. So, so to link the two together, focus on process because you can get measurable results, and then focus on adoption, especially on that first foray into digital tools to get people to use them and start the process of change.
Yeah, that all sounds, you know, I'd agree with a lot of that stuff that you said there, Paul. I'd add in there, like I'd mentioned in the last segment, the who, what, who, why, and what, which is kind of like a further sort of expansion in terms of the processes. If you understand who needs to see something, why it is that they want to see it, that will then drive the what it is that you need to collect or the what it is that you need to digitize, which then allows you to focus in on something very specific. So as you say, it might be something on the lines of you just want to understand better how many quality issues you have on site during construction. So that's a pretty easy one, right? You need something that's going to see or track how many quality issues you have on site, where those issues are coming from, so that you can then understand, is that because it's one of your supply chain members is not necessarily up to scratch in terms of quality, or is it because the drawings, the details, whatever it's going to be, you can then start tracking that information, which then gives you the knowledge that enables, you know, the business solution moving forwards. And as you say, one of the key things from my end is the user interface. A lot of the time, for myself, one of the big things is understanding user interface and making sure that those who need to use it can use it and they don't find it a horrible experience, because as soon as they do, they won't touch it ever again. And I'm sure you'll agree with this, Paul. The vast majority of times, you only have one chance to try and digitize something. If you try it, it doesn't work, people never touch it. I know, for example, we utilizing BIM within Wilmot Dixon, there was originally an initiative back in 2011 to try and introduce some BIM at that time, which was way before the PAS 1192 documentation. And when it came around to April 2016, it was initially a little bit of a struggle trying to get it off the ground because people had seen it previously. It hadn't necessarily worked too well at the time, kind of adopted a little bits of it here and there, but nothing major, which then meant it was just more, you have to get over that additional hurdle of people having a barrier up initially to say, we tried it before, we didn't like it. Which, yeah, it becomes fun when you end up in those sorts of scenarios. But it's one of those things that, you know, my biggest tip in terms of getting started is understand who it is, why it is they need to see that information, and then that will drive what it is that you need to collect and what it is that you need to digitize, which then means that when you're trying to look for the solution, you find one that is very good for what it is that you need to do, because yeah, it just makes it easier.
Oh, couldn't agree more with you, Andrew. I think understanding what the place that you need to get to basically is so important. And then you can manage expectations through the journey to get to that place, so that people don't fall into that trap of, oh, I tried it once, didn't like it, I never touched it again. You can manage expectations to get to your ultimate goal there, and that definitely is the way to go. And one of the things I just add in is that in our own solution, what we do is digitize processes, obviously, but an approach we take, which is interesting, is that we are trying to digitize processes that existed on paper before. And as Andrew said, people tend to fall back on what they know best, and they understand paper, and they're reluctant to move away from paper. So how do you get them to do that? Well, you start off by maybe building a process or a form that actually looks like the piece of paper, and then you gradually change it and improve it over time. But the key thing there is that you gradually change it. So you put it out to end users, and you let them try it out, and they come back to you and they say, oh, nah, that's all wrong, I don't like this, just don't like this user experience at all. And you can ask them why, and then you can go and fix it and push it out again. And this iterative approach of actually refining and refining and refining till you get to a place where they don't have any problems anymore. That really is what you need to do sometimes to help with adoption. To actually change your processes, change the detail in it, to actually convince people, oh, hey, you know what, actually, this is better than paper. I'm going to just use this all the time. But yeah, it's the journey there. And I think going back to Andrew's point, setting those expectations and bring them on that journey, it's really, really critical.
Yeah, I think you probably agree with this, Paul. The best process is the one that people don't realize that they're working in.
Oh, yeah, very good point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It is achievable. It is achievable, just about, but it can take a while to get there.
It takes a little while. And you know what we find, by the way, just a little bit of feedback from our customer base, is that the first one's always the hardest. So like time and time again, we deal with construction companies, and the very first process they put out there is always the hardest one, because everybody's learning. And it's not just the people who are using the process, it's the people who are configuring it, and getting over that first hurdle is always the hardest. It's always the most work, it's always the longest time frame. But then once you get that one in place, people tend to find, okay, well, we got this new normal now, this new way of working, we understand it, and then adopting new technology in general, I think, becomes easier once you've got over that first hurdle.
So Paul, I think what you're saying there is that business-led automation really is at the forefront. And and Andrew, you chatted about adoption there, and it really is important to have a tool that your business people are going to be happy to use and being able to develop themselves. So Paul, what are your thoughts around that, and what key factors should people be thinking about when looking at a solution?
Yeah, well, we kind of I've touched on it a little bit already, but we do feel that business-led automation is the way to go. And it'd be interesting to hear what your opinion is going to be on this, Andrew. But what we find is that if you lead with purely through IT just deliver a system into the business, and the business just have to accept it, that tends to work some of the time, and sometimes you get a lot of kickback from the business. But if you can actually get the business more involved in the whole process of the delivery of the solution, and get some, so that they take some ownership of it, then that becomes a whole lot easier. If you can give them ownership of the digitization of their processes, for example, then they feel ownership of it, and they will more readily adopt the solution. And ultimately, adoption is what you want, because adoption gets you data and so on, and you can do the analytics and so on. So it's really that business-led automation really is all about the business taking ownership of their own solutions. And once they take ownership, then the adoption rate is much better, much higher. It's easier to make that change, to get over that first hurdle if you heavily involve the business end users in it.
Yep, I'd agree with that, Paul. In terms of what you're saying, from experience, the best methodology that we found is that the business identifies a need, and then the IT side help investigate and find what the best method or what the options are, basically. And then sort of collaborating between the two different parts of the business ensures that you have a system and a software that people will utilize and people will work with, because it replicates their processes in terms of how they currently work or how they want to work in the future, whilst still being suitable to fit in with the rest of the architecture within the business from an IT perspective. That's really the only way to really make things work in these current days. Because as you say, otherwise you end up with a solution which, for people who are using it, they feel like it's being thrust and forced upon them, and they don't like it. They immediately don't like it. I think a friend of mine sort of gave a great analogy along the lines of what's the similarity between PowerPoints, processes, and kids? And the similarity is that we all love our own more than we love someone else's. And it's very true. If someone gives you a process, you're like, I don't like this, I want to make a change. But if you're involved in the development of that process, it becomes yours. You know, you like it and you're an advocate for it. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great analogy there.
Great, thanks very much for your tips, guys. Some really good ones in there, and I think that leads us on nicely to then discuss, where technology fits with all this. So obviously we chatted about solutions there and picking the right solutions, but where does technology fit there? So Andrew, maybe you could share how important sustainability is in your organization and how you're addressing it. I know it's very topical at the moment.
It certainly is. Wilmot Dixon have just recently released our Now or Never strategy, which is specifically looking at sustainability from within our organization up to 2030, 2040, various different targets. But I think we can all agree, outside of our own internal strategy, that the COVID pandemic has just shown how, with a concerted effort throughout the world, that we can really help with climate change, local communities, making sure that the planet is better for future generations. Stories of streams that never had any fish in it, within 3 or 4 months, all of a sudden there were fish living back in it and teeming with life. It's achievable for us to do this. So the company has released a strategy called Now or Never, and it focuses around 3 main things. One is brilliant buildings, so ensuring that we're delivering sustainable buildings, net zero carbon, passive house, those sorts of things, being future ready from that climate change side of things. Building lives, so making sure that we're enhancing the communities in which we build, so providing back to the local area, as well as obviously creating a better planet. So trying to make sure that where we work, we leave the environment in a better place than where we originally, or when we first came in there. And some of you are probably wondering, well, where does digital fit into this, and where does process come into this? And it's like, well, the only way that you can achieve these things is by being digitized. You can't achieve this by sticking with a paper process, or sorry, let me rephrase that. You can, but incredibly inefficiently you can achieve that. And it will just be it's not sustainable for the business to be able to do that in a paper-based format. You have to digitize to be able to enable these levels of sustainability that we want to achieve as a business moving forwards. So yeah, it's an incredibly important thing, and I think I believe, is it most of the local authorities, if not all of the local authorities, have declared some kind of a climate emergency around the UK. Everyone is really starting to look at this and trying to find ways to make sure that we're doing things sustainably, and digitizing is the only way that we can really achieve this.
Yeah, Andrew, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's really risen up the agenda. Like, a lot of people are talking to us about sustainability and so on now. And absolutely, it has to be a cultural change. Cultural comes first. So you got to change your culture to make sustainability top of the minds of workers, essentially. So they're always thinking about it. But just like you said, I think, having digital controls in place that assist people basically to understand the impact of what they're doing on the environment is something that really helps and kind of I don't like using the term enforces, but essentially guides people to practice sustainable operations. So I think digital tools can really help in this. Digital tools in all areas, but certainly digital processes will be one of those tools that would make a big difference in people's overall sustainability scores. And of course, there's another side to this as well, which is regulations. So as more and more regulations come in, it'll be important to be able to evidence the fact that you are practicing sustainable practices. So having that digital solution, having that all that activity recorded, if you like, so that whenever the regulator shows up, you can say, "Oh yeah, look, we're a sustainable company." That's also going to be very important, increasingly important going forward. So yeah, as you say, Andrew, digital solutions are really going to be a requirement to implement, improve your sustainability.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I know we've heard the term processless or paperless workplace a lot lately. Not processless, paperless workplace a lot lately, and I suppose that's kind of driven the use of mobile devices on sites. But Andrew, maybe you could share if you've seen any advantages or disadvantages of this change.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of different examples. Back in 2018, I was lucky enough to head across to the Nordic countries, and we actually spoke to a company that was running a paperless site back in 2018. So they had gotten hold of a contractor who was classified as mid-size for out there, never worked in a digital environment before, traditional building contractor, give me the drawings, I'll build it, that kind of a side of things. And initially they always asked for a printer on site, at which point the customer would turn around and say, "You're not getting a printer on site." So it became a daily joke that the contractor would ring up and say, "Can I have a printer on site? Give me a printer." But they refused. And so the whole idea was that they used tablets, mobile phones, and they had specialist, I think they were called, I've forgotten the terminology of them now, but effectively they were flight cases with computers inside of them that that were dropped on site in pertinent locations that people could go to, see the drawings, understand what was going on, all in a digital way. And they found huge amounts of efficiencies. And even now, some of the technologies that we're utilizing provide everyone on site access to the design information. And one of the great things is when you're trying to get people to understand why we need to provide access to this kind of information on site is, well, you could have the perfect design of a building. You could have it fully costed down into every single nut and bolt. But if the person is working from a piece of paper that's telling him, the drawing that if he interprets that wrong, or if she interprets that wrong, and decides to install something out of sequence, all of a sudden, all that planning and that work has just gone to nothing because it just doesn't exist. So the use of mobile technology has to be there to enable people to have that initial communication piece to understand, well, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? And then second is then making sure that there's that traceability in terms of the installation and the sign off of those various different elements and items, saying that yes, they've been installed correctly, yes, they've been constructed correctly. For that traceability element, you have to do that, it's best if you do that via these same sort of systems, because all of a sudden, as you were saying before, Paul, you have this fully traceable set of information that goes through from design through to construction on site and through to handover. And we've seen incredible uptake from those outside of our organization when we've managed to implement these systems correctly on sites in terms of a digital sense. Immediately they're having access to systems or information they've never seen previously, and they're interacting with it in ways that we wouldn't have imagined, which means all of a sudden we're starting to get more collaboration between people. We're starting to get more comments back and more upfront understanding in terms of where there might be possible issues moving forwards, and really starting to drive up the quality and driving down the defects in terms of what it is that we're constructing. So yeah, whatever it is that you do business automation wise has to work on a mobile device. Otherwise, you get rid of 3/4 of the people that you're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. Like with our construction clients, it's mobile first. They basically tell us, oh yeah, we have to have mobile, and you know what? We have to have mobile offline too. So you have to have that ability to use these, access your processes and all that on site, and that has certain mobile requirements, and it's absolutely a prerequisite. You can't walk in the door without it, and it's a great thing because it allows people who are out on site to actually communicate very quickly with people in head office and with their suppliers and so on. And they can do that without having to drop into to head office and access, let's say, a desktop computer. So yeah, mobile is kind of critical to any system, I would say, going into construction today. Certainly anything that involves site operations, and that's certainly something that we're seeing all the time.
Great, thanks, guys. So I know we spoke a little bit earlier about external stakeholders. I just wanted to come back to that point. So, Paul, maybe you can share where technology fits with that and how process automation can bring organizations closer to their external stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few kind of use case scenarios that we come across quite often. And one of them I touched on already, which is interaction with suppliers, where suppliers might want to send you information or you might want to send them information. And traditionally, you might have done so on email or on paper. But with our solution, we offer another option, which is to involve them in your business process. And by involving them in the business process, what does that mean? Well, let's say the supplier might click on a link on your public website to open up a form and submit an application to become a supplier onboarding scenario. Or you might have a situation where you want to order some materials from a supplier and they're participating in a single step in a long chain of steps in a materials requisition process. So you have the ability with modern systems like FlowForma to actually externalize a step. What does that mean? You can actually assign a step in the process to an external user, an external entity, and let them go in and fill in the details for that one step, do their bit in the process, if you like, and then submit those back in, and those details are processed through further steps internally inside your organization. And what this does is it makes the interaction with the supplier a whole lot easier. Why? Because if they're filling in information, let's say on a digital form, um, that information can be validated as they're keying it in. So that, in other words, when they send in that information, let's say in an onboarding application form, it's already valid. You don't need to go back and ask them so many questions. And it just helps with the general interaction with your supplier and also with your customers. You can use this exact same methods to exchange data and documentation with your customers as well. And we find that's really important. As I was saying earlier on, particularly so in construction. I think we've seen it in construction more than any other industry, where there are so many external suppliers and external contractors and so on, as well as your customers, that you need to interact with. And having that ability to interact digitally, that isn't lost on an email chain, really helps a lot. We find, and I'll just go back to that one point, that we find that the number of passbacks when information is captured on an electronic form versus via, let's say, a document attached to an email is really reduced, because generally speaking, obviously there's no control over the content of an email. So when an email arrives, a supplier may well have missed out one or two critical pieces of information, and you have to send it back to them again, and then it comes back in and goes back out and so on. And there's an iterative cycle of passing information around until it's right. That's really reduced if you actually start using electronic forms as a means of passing information between you and your supplier, you and your customer, etc. So we really find that externalizing your processes is something that can really benefit, especially the construction industry, because there is so much interactions with external parties. So that's what we've seen across a number of our clients now. And usually when we talk about externalizing processes, that really resonates with construction firms. And I don't know, Andrew, have you come across this before? Is this something that that resonates with yourself?
Definitely. I think in the past there's always been a reliance on internalization in terms of processes, so making sure that the process works internally only. But within construction, the only way that you get a quality product at the end of it is making sure that you get everyone involved in the same process. So you're not double handling, triple handling, quadruply handling information and getting rid of emails. I wish we could get rid of emails, but unfortunately we're a few years away from that yet, I think. But I think I heard somewhere before, just to give people a sense of scale, it's between 70 and 150 different organizations are involved typically on a construction project. Obviously, it's dependent on size, and you got something like an HS2 or a Crossrail, then obviously it's significantly more. But even so, that's a huge number of organizations that all need to communicate, all need to be involved within the process of constructing a building. So opening it up to get those key stakeholders initially, but eventually all stakeholders involved in the process is a utopia scenario to be in for sure.
Yep, definitely.
Great. So we'll move away from that, and maybe we can chat a little bit about keeping up with regulations and ensuring compliance. So Andrew, I don't know if you could share some examples here with how technology can help in this area.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different aspects to this. I think in terms of some of the more, I call it standard construction processes that we deal with. So, for example, timber certificates, making sure that we're using sustainably sourced timber from our different supply chain. That's a process which is fairly recognisable, and I think every construction site within the UK can follow this process and can provide this this kind of information, as well as things like waste tickets. To ensure that we're tracking where it is that waste material is going, whether it's being kept on site, going to landfill, being recycled, sustainably reused. So that side of things and keeping up the regulations and compliance on that side is quite standard, I guess is probably an easy way to describe it. The interesting one coming up is going to be product information and compliance from a building safety side of things. So there is new legislation which is coming in, which I think is a building safety bill, which is sort of like a follow-on, or sorry, a response to the Grenfell incident that happened back in 2017, and it's focused around high-rise residential buildings and traceability of information through design, construction, installation, and then handover. And effectively, what will be required is a fully traceable set of information all the way back through the process to make sure that the thing has been designed correctly, the product that's been chosen is the correct one that meets the criteria, and then effectively also includes installation side of things. So was it installed correctly? Was it signed off correctly? All these sorts of things to make sure that the residents that live in those buildings are safe and they can sleep soundly at night in those places. And that level of information is something that I don't think the industry has come across previously. And there's going to be a lot of interoperability that's required between manufacturers, installers and suppliers, even building merchants, for example, as well as contractors, customers, consultants. There's going to need to be a big set of interconnectivity between the two. And this, more than anything, I think is going to start driving adoption of more currently niche processes and technology that people traditionally haven't had to deal with, because they've been able to get around it's the wrong word. They've been able to achieve compliance by using digitized versions of paper processes, because that's easy enough to do. But now this is going to be asking for something which is, if it was a paper process, it's a significant paper process. A digital process would be a lot easier, a lot simpler to achieve. So yeah, that should be an interesting one to see how that pans out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that, Andrew. I think, like, if I think back maybe 3-4 years, dealing with some large projects, they were essentially recording everything on paper, and for regulatory purposes, they were having to store all that paper. So you would end up literally at the end of the project with a warehouse full of paper that, frankly, could not really be used. I mean, if anybody ever wanted to investigate something or find out a detail on something, well, it was in a paper file buried underneath another paper file somewhere on the far end of the warehouse. There, in reality, it wasn't a usable data store, and wasn't a usable audit trail, if you like, of the project. But with digital technologies all the way through the project, you can store all the information about the activities, all the drawings, etc., all stored digitally, so that at the very end of the project, you actually have a digital data store that you can pass on then to, let's say, the building maintenance firm who takes care of the building, and they can literally, at the touch of a button, go into, let's say, a 3D model and click on an area of the 3D model and find out all the details relating to the construction of that part of the building. That's just a fantastic, step forward, a really, really significant step forward in terms of what you simply couldn't do that before. I remember talking to a company where they were actually the people who were maintaining the building, so they were the maintenance company. And when I looked at what had been handed over to them from the construction company, they basically had a selection of paper files, and it was so difficult to actually access any information within that paper file. While if you look at a modern build, and I know we're not there yet across the board, but like if a modern build built with the latest digital tools, everything is just an easily searchable digital library, so you can quickly get to the information that you need to get to. And that includes all the processes, all the data captured during the build. It's all so much more easily accessible, which I guess the truth of it is it's going to reduce the ongoing maintenance costs down the line. So there is a real like net win at the end of the day for the building owners and so on. But there's lots of aspects to it. I'm not going to pretend that I know everyone. There's lots of aspects to it, the benefits of going digital during the build phase.
Great, thanks, Mil, guys. Paul, we might just quickly touch on that last point there. So the 27% of respondents from a recently commissioned survey by FlowForma, so those 27% shared that they didn't have enough budget to get processes online. So I suppose in construction, budgets is always a topical conversation. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just from my own perspective, then I'd say that what we certainly notice is that IT spend or technology spend within construction projects is always very, very low in comparison to, let's say, projects in other industries. And therefore, there's always a challenge to understand the value proposition of any technology that's going to be brought on board. So people have to be very confident that if they're bringing in any tool, any technology, that's going to generate tangible benefits before they're going to part with their money. And one of the things I'd say is that there has been a much increased awareness of what digital tools bring to the table now, because they have been proven in enough projects at this stage that people are getting an understanding now of just how much benefit can be brought from a digital tool. How much value are they going to get at the end of the day? There's a better understanding now in IT management and in construction management in general of what digital tools are bringing to the table. So I think that this number is going to change over time. So as we see here, 27%, that number is going to reduce because people are actually going to realize what value is bringing in, and the value that's being brought in is going to increase those budgets over time to accommodate any cost of digital tools. Why? Because people realize that whatever they cost, you're going to get a whole lot more back in terms of the value that they bring to the table. So the other thing I'd say is that the people who are saying that they don't think they have enough budget, again, maybe not understanding the value statement. And if they understood the value that was being brought to the table, they'd be able to, I feel, argue the case better for digital tools. And I'm sure Andrew would agree with that one, in that the digital tools of today really bring a lot of value and add a lot in terms of productivity and so on to construction projects. Sorry, Andrew, I'll let you take that.
No, that's 100% the case, and I think you used the right term there. Is value. A lot of people a lot of people have in the past used return on investment, which I find is a very commercially led term. It's always pounds, shillings, and pence, although shillings don't necessarily exist anymore. But it's one of those things where a lot of the time with the digital systems, there's other benefits that aren't necessarily you don't necessarily see it in terms of cold hard pounds that come back. It's better understanding, better communication, better collaboration. It's removing issues from occurring before they've even occurred using digital systems, which I know one of the big interesting scenarios with a lot of the things I see in terms of like the value proposition that digital systems can bring across is that it's very hard to put a figure on it, because there's so many other elements that get touched by introducing a digital process or a digital system into a company that sometimes you just cannot put a figure on it. It's very difficult to put the productivity that's on there.
Sorry, yes, absolutely. And I think this is where some case studies and so on can help. So you can look to see where those tools have been implemented. There's enough people around that have implemented the tools who can actually say, okay, well, yeah, this was the level of benefit that we achieved. Like we implemented FlowForma there on the A14 project, which was a project that ran some years ago, and they actually measured the benefits. One of the great things about using digital tools is that you can often measure the benefits because you're now capturing the information electronically, which means you can report on it. So you can actually start to measure the benefits, and it's really interesting. Some of the measures that have come up, like people are seeing that they would get a benefit of £77,000, for example, on one of the processes that they digitized on the A14. So they're able to measure that number, and having those numbers available in the public domain really helps people to start to cost justify, if you like, the investment in technology. But as I was saying, those figures are becoming more and more prevalent now. I mean, like in terms of our own company, we have case studies that show actual tangible benefits, and that always helps the discussion, right? If you can measure, if you can show tangible benefits.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, that leads us really nicely into our final topic, is around the return on investment and some success stories, as you just mentioned. So, Paul, I'm not sure if you want to quickly chat about this slide here.
Yeah, sure. Well, we've got I'll just talk a little bit in general about some of our clients. So it's going back, I guess, to the point I just mentioned, which is that we've got these measurable benefits. So if you consider companies like reliable contractors, for example, they've been able to introduce processes that allow their contractors to interact directly with them. So they're filling in. Remember, I was talking about the public forms where you can use forms that extend out of your operation. That's exactly what reliable contractors do. They can extend the process out to their contractors, so that when they're advertising positions, the contractors can fill in their details remotely on a form that's submitted in, which really saves some significant benefits. So it brings some significant benefits in terms of they're not handling paper anymore. Also with companies like Gallagher Group, for example, who digitized over 37 processes in the space of 10 weeks. Isn't that incredible? And really that level of saving, when you're looking at a typical process, the increase in performance over a paper-based process is in excess of 15%. Sorry, excess of 50%. If you can digitize 37 in 10 weeks, whoa, that's going to save you a lot of money at the end of the day. So we're really, what we're finding is that using tools like our own, but also others as well, that you can actually digitize solutions and introduce digital tools very quickly now, and you can actually measure those benefits. And as people are doing that, they're really identifying significant savings. So we have some figures that we can show you later on from a Tideway, so that they will show you the some real measured benefits. Oh, thank you very much, Ursula. So this is a little mini case study of implement digital processes in CVP Tideway East. They were very dependent on paper. They had lots of communication channels. Andrew talked a little bit about communication being so important, and it absolutely is. If you can't communicate with all the parties in a process, that process is not going to run very efficiently. And of course, they're working over a distributed site because it's a tunneling project. And they chose a no-code digital process automation tool to try and address some of those challenges that they were having and make themselves more efficient. And they were able to train their own staff up to start digitizing the processes using, we helped them with that using a specialized training program. And their first process that they digitized was new starters and leavers. So they were able to handle then the onboarding and offboarding of contractors, which is a many-step process that was quite difficult to track when it was running on paper. So whatever about the execution of the process itself, it was difficult to track exactly where things were in the process at any one point in time. And obviously, having those digital processes really helped and supported them in their COVID-19 record keeping, because they were able to record when contractors came on site, when they went off site, and that they complied with all the COVID restrictions during the period. So they reckon that they did some analysis on the saving that was being made, and they reckon that over a space of a year, they were saving 700 hours of effort, which is really quite significant. And that's just in the first year of operations, the first year of going digital. So in that first year, of course, they're not going to digitize every single process in the organization. Of the ones that they did, they were saving 700 hours. And the big spin-off, and this is something that Andrew has touched on, is that when you use digital tools, you're capturing that data of all the data related to your operations. And that really is so valuable, because then you can carry out some analytics, you can introduce dashboards through tools like Microsoft Power BI, and then you can start seeing bottlenecks in your processes and start avoiding delays that otherwise would be detected a lot later. Because your digital tools are capturing that information right now, and so they're available on reports and dashboards straight away, and you can act a lot faster on any kind of delays that you might see on the project.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Paul. And thank you, Andrew, as well for your insights there. I know we covered a lot of detail in the past couple of slides. So I just want to remind the audience, if they do have any questions, to pop them into the chat, and we'll have our Q&A at the end. So nearly there. But Paul, I know for the next couple of minutes, you'd like to chat a little bit about the FlowForma process automation tool, and then you're going to give us a quick 5 to 10 minute demonstration of FlowForma as well. So I'll let you kick off with the next couple of slides.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ursula. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the FlowForma organization. So it was formed in 2016, and we're an award-winning process automation provider. So we focus in on process automation. So while there's a wide range of digital tools going into construction right now, our focus is on digital processes. And as I said at the very beginning, the reason for that is that processes get results, measurable results. So it's a great way to kick off a digital transformation, to actually use focuses on process at the outset. And we're seen as revolutionizing the process management space because we enable those business people to actually digitize those processes. So typically in the past, you would have been dependent on the IT department or your IT supplier, while with us, you can use your own business staff to actually digitize the processes. The people who know the processes best can go in and configure solutions. We'll see that in a very short while. Just to say that we've over 200,000 people across the world using FlowForma at this point, so we're rapidly expanding. And of course, that's driven as well by the recent pandemic, where people are rushing to digitize as much as possible. Being recognized by various bodies, including Forrester, for example. We've also a Microsoft Gold Partner, and we've also got very high reviews on a thing called G2 Cloud, which I can recommend you drop over there and have a look at the reviews that we've received. We've got a lot of customers in the construction sector, and one of the things that I'd say about the construction sector is that every company that approach us tend to have the same kinds of problems, the same kinds of things that they're looking for. So one of the things is that they don't have a whole lot of IT resources. So they're looking for a tool that helps empower citizen developers. And just for it's a fancy name for business people. So your engineers and your apprentices and so on, empower them to actually do some digitization. Why? Because they're quite restricted in terms of their IT resources. Also, they need a tool that's very easy to adopt, because at the end of the day, if construction workers don't adopt a solution, you're not going to get any of the benefits. So it's got to be proven adoption, ease of adoption. And the ability to integrate with communication channels. As Andrew would have mentioned earlier on, communication is so important. You have to have that ability to integrate with tools such as Microsoft Teams, so that you can communicate very easily and automatically, and make everybody more productive. And again, that engagement with customers and suppliers, engagement with external entities, is something that comes up with construction companies an awful lot, simply because there are so many suppliers and customers and so on that you actually have to deal with in the world of construction. You want to remove paper to improve sustainability, but also to increase efficiency in your operations, make those processes run faster. You have to have mobile access, and that mobile access has to support offline, because typically on construction sites, as you know, you don't always have connectivity. And it always helps to have low startup costs. So as with many cloud systems out there, you can start off small and grow as you adopt. So that's really how FlowForma works, and it allows you to have a small amount of initial investment, and then measure the success of that investment, and then that justifies a kind of hopefully kicks off a snowball effect and justifies further investment, so you can digitize more and more and more as you go along. And you have to be able to prove the return. So again, that's all to do with measurability, so that you can actually measure the success of your the implementation of those digital processes. Okay, so in terms of the types of processes that you can digitize, well, you can digitize pretty much any process that you have on paper. So any process that you have right now, you can digitize, and there's some examples there. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see there, like for example, in health and safety, you can use FlowForma for risk. People use FlowForma for risk management, obviously for incident management. That's probably the most popular use across the board of FlowForma, actually. For doing things like site inspections, QA analysis, and also doing safety checklists, safety observations. In fact, I'm going to show you an example of a safety observation shortly, so you can see what it looks like in a FlowForma system. So just to before I kick off and show you that, just to say that FlowForma, we deal with a lot of construction companies at this point. And that's prompted us to build a set of accelerators. What are they? They are pre-built solutions that you can start using on day one, that are related to several common construction processes. We've launched 9 on the outset, and this is in fact the official launch of those accelerators, so they're available from today. And what we're going to do is we're going to expand on those over time to build a larger library of digital processes that you can use and just download and start using straight away. It really helps you kickstart off your digitization. So we're going to go through some of those in a demonstration, so you can see what they actually look like, because I guess a lot of you at the moment will be wondering, well, what does a digitized processes look like? So what we'll do here is I'm going to show my screen, and Ursula, maybe if you could let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, I can see that perfectly, Paul.
That's great. So what we're seeing here is a FlowForma implementation, and you'll see a lot of boxes up at the top, and those boxes are basically they're links that you're using to kick off a process. And all the information that's captured in the process is all stored inside the central data store. Now, for us, what we do is we actually use Microsoft SharePoint Online as a data store, so that all your documentation, all your data is automatically saved in SharePoint. It can also be saved externally if you need to do it as well. And when you kick off a process like this, the safety observation report, what it does is it shows you a form that you can fill in. And as you can see down here, a lot of the fields and so on can be pre-filled, and the whole idea with that is that you're making the form as easy to adopt as possible. So you're trying to do as much work for people as you possibly can. So you can pre-fill some of these fields and allow people to modify them if they want to and so on. But in this case here, the system knows who you are. So I'm logged in as David Shanley, and it knows what the current date and time is. It automatically sets it. It also knows locations. So I'm currently located in Dublin in Ireland, and it's picked that up and automatically then applied that to this this area here. So it's actually capturing the GPS coordinates of my current device. Now we also give you the ability to look up alternative locations if you want to. So I can look up London, for example, and it will shift to London. You can also move the pointer and so on to indicate another location. So it's basically using the Google Map service here to allow you to record a map inside the form. Then I can pick a location name. So in this case, I'm going for a mud pump. And then I can upload a photograph. So I'm just going to select a photograph from my device. In this case, I'm using my desktop computer. So I'm just going to pick a picture of some plants in this instance. Not a very good example of a construction photograph, but imagine this is a map. And then you can go in and you can annotate an area of the map and enter in some comments about that area. So the whole idea is that you're being brought through here in electronic form, and you can include guidance inside the form. So this is a point that Andrew made right at the start of the show, that when it comes to adoption, it's so important that the system helps the end user along. So we're helping the end user here by putting in some instructions. And the whole form is dynamic. So as you can put in instructions in terms of like text instructions, like you see here. You can also put in graphical instructions and so on. You can make those instructions appear and disappear appropriately based on the data that you're capturing. And the whole system is dynamic. So let's say if I want to make a corrective observation on this, it asks me, well, what was the corrective observation type? Was an unsafe condition, an unsafe act. I can then record in details of the act in these boxes. And I can indicate that I want to have a follow-up action. Now, if you look at the very top here, you'll see we have a single box, just record a safety observation. But when I select a follow-up action, it automatically adds in a new step in the business process. So what will happen here is that we're going to record these safety details, and then the workflow will progress on to a follow-up action. And the follow-up action could be carried out by a different person in the organization. And that's the follow-up action to address the safety concern, okay? So down here, then I can say, okay, well, I want to put in a signature. Remember, I was talking about those signatures. Well, this is an example of a signature. Now, the system actually captures who I am, and when I press button, it captures the full audit trail. But we allow you to enter in signatures here, because in construction, that's what you typically do. So if you want to use signatures, you still can. And then at the end of it all, I press submit to move the workflow on to the next step, which happens automatically. And if necessary, the system can automatically send out an email to the next person to say, hey, click on this link. You've got a follow-up action that you need to complete. And then in here, I can actually indicate if the follow-up action is completed or not. Also, the system has the ability to generate documentation and send emails. So down here, we have a document that was generated. And this document is actually the safety observation report, which includes a signature and so on. And this document can be emailed to people inside or outside of the organization. So I'm racing through this, guys, but hopefully you get an idea now of what a digital process looks like. We use a forms-based system so that you're filling in data. The form is dynamic. It's pre-filled as necessary so that it minimizes the amount of work that the site worker has to do. Also, it guides the site worker by providing all that detail in terms of those instructions, so that at the end of the day, you get a system that's very easy to adopt. And the same form is available on mobile devices. So if I jump over here on a mobile, my mobile emulator, sorry, I can't show you a mobile device on the screen, but this is emulating an Android device. You'll see that the form looks exactly the same on the mobile device. So straight away, you can use it on mobile devices. And you can also use it in a Teams environment. So if I click, if I click onto Teams here, I have a Teams site. If I click on a link, you can actually see an example of a form running in Teams. In this case, I'm showing a pre-return to work form. There's a lot more workflow involved in this particular form, but it's the same basic idea. So every process that you implement has a step bar that you see here, and it has a section of data that you're collecting as well. Now, I'm very tight for time today, so what I'm going to do is I'll just jump back to my site here. And I'm just going to show you that all the information that you're capturing in all of your processes is available for reporting. So I'm going to show you a demo construction site here. It's a different site, but what it has is a built-in report that's showing you an analysis of material requisitions. So all of this data that you're seeing on the screen, you're able to see it because you've digitized, in this case, your materials requisition process. So you have access to all that data straight away, and you can represent that in a nice, easy to use report within the system. As I said again, you're only being able to do this because you've used an electronic system to capture all that data in the first place. Okay, so let me just jump back over here, and Ursula, I would just check with you if I've got another couple of minutes to talk.
Paul, you might have, we're just a little bit tight on time. So what I was going to suggest actually is, I know you've gone through a lot there, and there is a lot more to show. But if anyone is interested, Paul and one of Paul's colleagues can give a demonstration of the accelerators in a lot more depth and a lot more detail. So I would definitely offer that up. I'm very sorry that we're short on time, Paul.
No
But yeah,
problem.
I would definitely recommend that if you are interested in a demo, you can go on to the FlowForma website and request some time with Paul or one of his colleagues there, and we will get that sorted for you. Because I've seen the accelerators myself, and they're really impressive, and there's a lot of detail there that I'm sure a lot of people would like to see.
That's great. I'll just pass back to you, Ursula.
Great, thanks, Emil. Okay, so before we get into a Q&A, just a quick slide to sum up the discussion points that were covered today. So before, just to get ahead of your competitors and start your digital transformation journey, to overcome demand, empower your business users to digitize their own processes with the support from IT, as Paul mentioned before. You can finally say goodbye to stacks of paper and manual processes by digitizing your paper-based processes. We did cover a lot around engaging with external stakeholders, which in turn creates better relationships and better communication. And off the back of this, I know I mentioned the free demo there, but if you would like to take a free trial of FlowForma, you can do so today. It's a 14-day free trial. It's also available on the website, or if you go to flowforma.com/trial, you will see that there as well. But for the time being, I would like to jump into some questions. So if Andrew, if that's okay with you, I know we have just over 5 minutes left, so we'll try cover as many questions as we possibly can. But I think some of the questions might be similar to the topics that you've covered, but you guys might just elaborate a little bit more if that's what people need. And if we don't get your question today, we will definitely send you an email response as soon as possible too. So the first one I jotted down here is somebody asked, and this is open to the both of you, if anyone has any tips on preventing project overruns with digital tools.
That's an interesting question.
You could probably have another webinar, Andrew, to discuss that whole topic.
I think you could, yes. I think you could. I think in a lot of instances where project overruns do come into play is typically because of a lack of communication in some way, shape, or form. So whether it's someone hasn't been informed of something, there's late design changes, there's budgetary elements or commercial elements which keep changing because of what do you want to call it? The design is fluctuating, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of it comes down to communication, is what I found in the past. So using digital systems and assuming people are engaging with them correctly and they're being used fully. Typically, particularly if you follow the tenet of a single source of truth, common data environment, plus all the other systems behind it, the project length is much more. Well, there's less risk in the project in the project length is what I would say. It won't necessarily always get rid of any possible project overrun because frankly you never know what's going to happen as soon as you dig into the ground. You don't know with 100% certainty what you'll find, so there's always some element of risk, but you can significantly reduce risk by using the digital tools. Your thoughts, Paul?
Yeah, no, I totally concur with that. I think risk is everything. And absolutely, by using digital systems, everything becomes a little bit more predictable. Of course, you can't predict everything, but but you can see everything that's going on. You're capturing that data so that you can actually build those dashboards that are reporting that information in real time, so you can see those delays happening when they happen. Like if you're back in paperland, you've no idea. You're depending on people making phone calls and so on and sending emails to actually be aware of the fact that there is a problem. If you're capturing things digitally, you're able to see those problems pretty much as they happen, and having that really helps in managing the problems. And as you say, it also reduces the risk, Andrew, in terms of understanding what's going on. Basically, if you've got a better grip on what's going on in the real world, you're able to manage those risks a whole lot better.
Great, thanks, Emil. I'll move on to the next one quickly. So someone has asked, do you think sustainability will be a focus globally, particularly in the US? So Andrew, maybe you want to kick off with that one.
Yes, is the short answer to that one. Sustainability is only going to become more and more pertinent as time goes on. I think it's impossible to ignore what it is that we need to do, particularly within our sector, because we have such an impact on how the world is used and the resources within it as well. That sustainability is going to be a key discussion point for both new buildings being constructed, as well as what do we do with the existing stock. I think I heard something along the lines of, but in 2050, something like 90% of all buildings will have already been built as we stand today. So, only 10% of the buildings in 2050 will be new builds. The rest will be existing. So we need to make sure it's sustainable, and how we deal with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think sustainability is only going to become more and more and more important. And while it is a cultural thing, I think people in general feel that they should be more. They should be sustainability aware, let's say, and there's a cultural thing going on there. But as well as that, there is hard regulations coming in that will force people to that will really penalize people if they don't prove their sustainability achievements. So with things like the Paris Accord, they're going to fine countries if they don't meet sustainability targets. Now, governments will only simply pass those fines on in some way to the people who are, building the buildings, running the transport system, etc. So yeah, it's just going to become higher and higher up the agenda, and it's going to have some real financial impact at the end of the day on companies. So they're going to have to address it in some way. And digitalization is definitely a way to control that.
Great, thank you so much, guys. I think we are very tight on time, so I won't pose any more questions on you, but as I said, we will reply via email with our answers in regards to your questions if we've missed them today. Before I pass over to Selena, I just want to say thank you to Paul and Andrew for joining us today.
Thanks, Ursula, for moderating the session, and Paul and Andrew for your great contribution. Very interesting discussion.